Well, welcome everyone into Bayou Roar. On our episode today, we're going to be talking about the transfer portal as it is about to open up. And I'll also be sharing some final thoughts on LSU's 2025 football season as it has now wrapped up officially. But we're going to start this episode off by talking about some quick news that does relate to how the Tigers are going to approach the transfer portal. And the first thing being, we got two announcements from players today, on the day that I'm recording this, which is New Year's Eve, about their plans to return to LSU. The first one being Harlem Berry, who confirmed that he will be back for his sophomore year, which is massive. And then Deshaun Spears freaked everybody out because he announced that he was planning on going to the transfer portal. And then after a couple hours of talking to the staff, decided to change his mind and ended up saying that he was also going to be returning for his next season in Baton Rouge, which is obviously very, very good news. Now, another piece of good news that came for the football team today is that it looks like LSU is in the process of adding James Craig back to the staff after he spent a little while coaching in different places and kind of taking a little bit of a break. So James Craig was on staff in 2019. He was the LSU O-line coach back then when they won the Joe Moore Award. And then, of course, he got into some trouble because he was recruiting via methods that were, at that point in time, not allowed. Slipping money, basically doing favors for kids, getting them stuff, all that stuff. Which is now obviously very much more legal in today's college football, and he was an analyst, I believe, for Ole Miss most recently. So now they are planning to return him in some capacity to the staff. He's obviously not going to be the O-line coach directly because that is Eric Wolford's job, but he is going to be back. And I think that's really, really good because he knows LSU. He knows the kids that they're going to be bringing in and working with. And so I think it's going to be really good for him overall to be back on this staff, even in just like a support role. So with all that being said, I think obviously the news of Spears and Berry, though, are the biggest pieces of news that you could have gotten. Because now this changes your approach a little bit for the portal. Because now you know, okay, we've got a guy who is going to be obviously a huge part of our running back room now back into the fold. And obviously he was a top priority for Kiffin and this staff. There was lots of reports that they were spending a lot of time talking to him, basically re-recruiting him to come back. And obviously that paid off for Kiffin and company. And Spears is huge because he is pretty much lined up to be a starting safety for you next year. And you're in a rare position now where you're not going to have to necessarily go out and hunt for another starting safety in the portal, because you should have now Spears back as well as Tamarcus Cooley. And so that's going to help things out tremendously as the portal opens up here, basically by the time this episode comes out tomorrow on January the 2nd. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about the portal. Because obviously I know that that is the biggest thing on the mind of all LSU fans now that the football season has officially wrapped up. And look, the portal is obviously the thing that Lane Kiffin is known for the most. That was one of the things that immediately was the most attractive thing about him being LSU's next head coach, is his prowess when it comes to the portal. And LSU finds themselves in a situation where they've got a good bit of needs that they're going to have to address in the portal. And so for our episode today, I want to talk about the positions that I think are the most important for LSU to go in and address, and read the names of just a few guys at each position that I think they should go after. Now, obviously, there are guys entering the portal constantly. I mean, even since I came up with this list just a few days ago, there have been tons of more names that have popped into the portal, which means this list is already potentially out of, just out of whack already. So some of these names maybe aren't as attractive now as they were when I came up with this earlier, but we're going to run through them and I'm just going to read you guys who my favorite picks are. And so the first position we're going to talk about is the position that I think is the most important. And look, when we say most important, I think two positions obviously jump to a lot of LSU fans' minds. And I think it's kind of a 1A, 1B situation. But for 1A, I've got quarterback. And here's why. I think quarterback is the most important domino that you have to have for whoever else you plan on bringing in, whether it's a receiver, a running back, heck, even some offensive linemen might like to know who their quarterback is going to be so they know, hey, yeah, I can play. I can get behind that guy. He seems really good. I wouldn't mind go playing for him and protecting him, making sure he's upright the whole time. So I think, obviously, quarterback is probably the biggest domino you need to address as quickly as possible. And there have been some names that, obviously, a lot of people have talked about since the second they've entered the portal. And so it doesn't surprise you that some of the first names on my list are guys like Sam Levitt and Brendan Sorsby. Two guys that are mobile. They've got good arm talent. Now, I think Sorsby's arm is a little bit more electric than Sam Levitt's arm is. But these are two guys that I think would fit the Kiffin offense very, very well and would provide, obviously, a much elevated style of quarterback play than what you've had the last couple of years. Now, before I move forward anymore, because obviously those are two guys that I think you have to go for no matter what. Even if you have Michael Van Buren, potentially Trinidad Chambliss getting an extra year and coming on board, I don't really care. I want to kick the tires on Levitt and Sorsby because I think those are two of the best quarterbacks in the portal that would fit Kiffin's system the best, and so I want them to be on board. But before I move forward, obviously we have to address the elephant in the room of Michael Van Buren and / or Trinidad Chambliss. And here's the thing, Trinidad Chambliss is still in the process of figuring out whether or not he's even going to have another year of eligibility. And so just for that fact alone, which shame on the NCAA that they have not made a decision on that, by the way, because this poor kid's future, no matter what he decides to do, is literally hanging in the balance right now. And so for Trinidad, like, you don't even know what the final decision is on him. So I think you just got to move on from that boat. Yes, would it be awesome to have a guy that you already know plays the system very, very well and can obviously do it at a high level in the SEC, which you don't know if Sam Levitt or Sorsby can do? Yes, obviously that would be the dream case scenario. But it just doesn't look like that is a very obvious thing that's happening. So I think you just got to move on because, again, this is the domino that you have to have fall to help you land some of the bigger fish in the pond. And I just don't think you can afford, if you're LSU, to sit around and sit on your hands hoping that Trinidad Chambliss, one, gets his waiver, but two, then decides that he wants to leave Ole Miss. Because that's not even a for sure conclusion either. I know we all like to think that it is, but it might not be the case. So with that being said, I just think you got to go ahead and roll the tires on somebody else because I don't think Trinidad is going to be decided anytime soon. Now, the other part of this is Michael Van Buren. And look, Michael Van Buren, as we're going to talk about as we finish our thoughts on the 2025 season, had his best game of the year against Houston in the Texas Bowl. No doubt about it, that boy went off, and he had a wonderful game, and that's awesome. You definitely saw some potential tools that he has that could fit in this Kiffin offense pretty well from the sense of mobility and from his arm as well. However, Van Buren still looks like a guy that's got to be refined a little bit. And so, is he going to be willing to take another year where he knows he's probably not going to be the favorite to start and potentially take a red shirt, which, by the way, he hasn't taken a red shirt yet because he's had to start so much for the last 2 years out of necessity. He still has a red shirt available, so he could still sit and not really waste any time. But does Van Buren want to do that? Does he want to stay? Obviously, with the NIL era, you could pay a guy to just kind of sit down with a clipboard and be fine. But no matter what, Van Buren, I think, obviously has an important choice to make. And he says he wants to stay at LSU. He says he would like to stay at LSU. And if he does, that's great. But I still think whether Van Buren stays or not, you've got to go out and get 2 quarterbacks from the portal. Because you can't just roll with Sorsby and Van Buren or Leavitt and Van Buren or whatever. Because Van Buren's literally the only quarterback left currently in the quarterback room. So you got to go out and get some more quarterbacks from the portal. That is 100% a certainty of something you have to do. So with that being said, go ahead and kick the tires then on bringing in 2 guys from the portal. And honestly, if I'm Lane Kiffin, I don't really care, even if Van Buren does look like a guy who could potentially be the starter. If you've got a chance to land Leavitt or Sorsby, again, you've got to do it. Because I think even if Van Buren takes a tremendous leap forward in the offseason, well, you still got 2 guys who could come in and immediately start for you and have played at a much higher level than him in the past. And I think you got to just roll the dice on them. So even if Van Buren does come back, I still think he's a guy that's still maybe a little ways away from being a really, really consistent high-level starter for LSU, but obviously you see the talent. Now, some other names on my list: Aiden Childs, Josh Hoover, Bryce Baker. These are guys that I think could work for the system. Aiden Childs is very, very mobile. He's just a little bit, developmentally not completely there yet. Like, he still needs to work on decision making. He still needs to work on his footwork a little bit. So I just don't know if Kiffin would really want to bring in a guy like that as the starter. And with Josh Hoover, he does do well in terms of decision making and distributing the ball and all that. It's just he's not very mobile. I mean, he can run, but it's not his main strength. And he doesn't have like a huge arm. And so I think while both of those guys have some potential and would be solid options, they're not my top choices for like starters. Bryce Baker is a young guy that I think you could maybe convince to come in and maybe wait his turn. He's a freshman leaving North Carolina. And while he may be looking for greener pastures, I think similarly to Van Buren last year leaving Mississippi State, where you thought, well, maybe he's looking for a place where he can start, and he ends up at LSU sitting on the bench. I think in today's day and age, you could probably convince Bryce Baker to come sit on the bench at least for 1 year and learn from Lane Kiffin and company, and then go somewhere else maybe the next year. I don't know. But Bryce Baker's got a lot of athleticism, and he's got a lot of ceiling to him that I think would be interesting to see if he could potentially come in and be here on the roster as an option. Now, Ashton Daniels is also on my list kind of as a last resort, because Ashton Daniels is leaving Auburn. He was a starter at Auburn for a little bit, and I think that's a guy that, kind of similar to Spencer Sanders, who was at Oklahoma State, had a really good career at Oklahoma State, and then Kiffin was able to convince him to just be the backup in Ole Miss for a year. And look, it was the weirdest decision ever, but he just did it because, he was just able to be talked into it. And Ashton Daniels, yes, may be looking somewhere to start for his final year of college football, but Kiffin may also be able to convince him to come in and just be a really solid veteran backup for whoever, just in case of injury or whatever. Now, it's also worth noting, again, since I've made this list, Deuce Knight from Auburn has also entered the transfer portal, and there's been a lot of buzz about LSU potentially chasing after him. And that's another guy that I think is young, is still kind of developing, and you could probably talk him into coming onto the roster as well and waiting out his turn, even if he's got to wait maybe a year to do so. But again, I think Sorsby or Leavitt, you're probably looking at a 1-year rental at best, which is fine considering Van Buren could still develop if he's still on the roster, and Deuce Knight could obviously also come in and spend the year developing. And the nice thing is for Kiffin, well, if one of those guys got hurt, then at least Van Buren has enough starting experience where you're not just left completely empty. So that's quarterback wise, there's several options I think this year that you could go after that could be really, really good. Now, the next position that, again, I think you could either flip flop this for 1A or 1B in terms of importance for LSU is obviously the offensive line. And the problem is when you're looking at the offensive line, traditionally in the portal, there's not really a whole lot of guys that usually jump off the page to you as being guys that you can just plug in and play right off the bat. Now, I had a list of guys, but I think I'm just going to kind of go to On3's site and look at the portal and kind of look at some of the top names and tell you some of the guys that I think should be considered offensive tackle wise for LSU to be in the mix for. And the first guy up is Xavier Chaplin. This is a guy that is transferring from Auburn. He's 6'6", 312 pounds. Now, obviously, he has got the size and I think the athleticism to compete for LSU and to be a really solid starter. The problem is I think he's still growing in a lot of areas despite being a redshirt junior. Apparently, from some reports that I've heard, he had a lot of problems with like pre-snap penalties and all that kind of stuff. But maybe with a different system, different coaching, he can clean that up a little bit. But Xavier Chaplin would be on my list. Josh Atkins, who is transferring out of Arizona State, is a guy that I think you should consider because he's 6'4", 290, coming from a Kenny Dillingham offense that's very creative and different as well. Similarly, kind of not exactly like Kiffin's offense, obviously, but you know what I mean. He features mobile quarterbacks, guys that can run around, do different stuff, RPOs, and I think that could be a guy that could fit in well for LSU. Now, you've also got some guys who just recently entered the portal, like Luke Baklentko, I think, 6'7", 280, coming from Oklahoma. That is the guy that obviously I think you should go after because he's got SEC experience, and I think that, should, raise some bells as a guy that you should go for sure. And then really, other than that, offensive tackle-wise, I think one last name on this list that I think you should consider, even though it may be a little bit crazy, is Tyree Adams. I know Tyree Adams was featured on this past offensive line for LSU that struggled a lot, but as we're going to talk about with offensive interior players as well, I just think this is a guy that you should still roll the dice on if you're Lane Kiffin and LSU. Because Tyree Adams actually did pretty well in pass blocking this year. He really did do a pretty good job according to his PFF grades against the pass. It was the run blocking where he really struggled. And somebody said this on a Baton Rouge radio station and on a podcast that I listened to as well. And I think it's true. Yes, this LSU offensive line played very poorly this year. And yes, there has been some red flags about guys like DJ Chester and some others in the past. But, with all of these recruiting sites and all these guys giving evaluations, not just On3, but Rivals and ESPN and all this stuff, a lot of these guys for LSU's offensive line the last few years have been 4- and 5-star guys. And you can't just tell me that they've whiffed on every single one of them. Yes, you're always going to whiff on a 4-star here and there. You're always going to whiff on a 5-star here and there. That's just how college football works. Some of these guys are coming from super small backcountry, programs in high school where, because they're 6'7", 300 pounds, they're barreling over everybody because they're just, so much bigger than everybody else. But there's other times where, they just whiff because they don't have the talent. There's other times where they hit, obviously, even if they are coming from small schools or big programs or wherever. But for me, it seems unlikely that you could have missed on every single guy that was on LSU's offensive line this past year at a 4 or 5-star level. And I feel like Tyree Adams is one of those guys. A guy that has a lot of potential that can play really good. And maybe he struggled a little bit this year, but maybe with a new scheme, with new coaching, with a new head coach, and overall building a new culture, maybe Adams kind of wakes up a little bit and all of a sudden he starts to play at the level that maybe everybody kind of expected him to coming out of high school. So I think Tyree Adams is a guy that you should roll the dice on as well if you're LSU. There was another guy I think originally that I had, but I think, again, with this list continuing to grow, I'm just going to kind of back off. And I'm going to move to the interior offensive line players. So these are your guards, your centers, all that type of stuff. And Carius Kern is at the top of On3's transfer portal list. And again, this is another guy from LSU's offensive line that I think you've got to go after if you're LSU and Lane Kiffin. And for the exact same reason that I gave for Tyree Adams. Carius Kern was a 5-star player coming out of high school. And honestly, while yes, he's had his freshman struggles throughout the season, he honestly showed the most physicality at times out of all the offensive linemen that LSU played this year. I think it would be a shame for him to just be walking out the door and you don't convince him to come back. I think Carius Kern has got to be a guy that you renegotiate with and convince him to come back. He played out of position a lot last year. He played tackle a lot. Really, he's built more to be a guard. And I think that would be excellent for Kiffin to be able to come back and land that guy. I think that's a guy that you've definitely got to go after. If you're Lane Kiffin and company, go get Carius Kern. Because again, the offensive line is a very weird position where there's not a whole lot of star players that enter from the portal. So really you're taking a lot more risks and a lot more roll of the dice anyways. So you've got to try to land the best of the best. And Carius Kern is not just the top listed interior offensive lineman on On3. He's the 17th overall player on On3's transfer portal rankings right now. So that's a guy you got to go get. Now, next up is Lyndon Cooper. He's a recent addition from Pittsburgh. This is a guy that's 6'3", 315. He is, another top 50 player for On3's transfer portal rankings. I think this is a guy you definitely go take a roll of the dice on. Again, size-wise, he seems to fit the profile of what would be a really good offensive lineman for LSU. I think this is, somebody that would work out well. And you just got to roll on the dice on guys that are the best of the best when it comes to offensive line, because there's just not that many of them. So I think you should go after him for sure. That's a guy that you should roll the dice on. Jake Renfro is a guy from Wisconsin that I think they should go after. He's 6'2", 310. He's kind of played a lot at Wisconsin in different positions. So some center, some guard, even some outside tackle here and there. This is a guy, though, that while his star potential is not very high, this is a guy that I think can be very solid. And sometimes that's just what you need. I think about LSU's offensive line in the past, and while, yes, Will Campbell, Emory Jones are guys that were homegrown talents and were awesome. Miles Frazier was a guy that everybody always talked about, the high ceiling, his athleticism, his power, and all that stuff. Garrett Dellinger was a guy that transferred in. And while, yes, he got drafted into the NFL, he was a guy that wasn't really known for necessarily just blowing people off the line, but he just played really solidly at that position. And he was another guy that had a lot of versatility throughout his career. So I think Renfro's a guy you should go after because, maybe, yeah, he's not as high profile a name as some of these other guys, but he is a dude that can just provide a nice presence for you on the offensive line on the inside, much like Josh Thompson did this year for you coming from Northwestern. This is another guy that I think could come in and do a solid job. Now, there are apparently also some injury history concerns for him, but I think all in all, this is a guy that you just got to go get, even if maybe, yeah, there's some problems with injuries in his past. You still got to roll the dice on him because he's a guy that can easily just bring some stability to your offensive line. Now, there's another Oklahoma guy in here, Troy Everett. I don't know how much he's played, but again, when you tell me there's a guard here that is 6'3", 280, I think you should always roll the dice on him with some experience in the SEC. Scrolling down the list, the last guy that I think really stuck out to me was Miles McVay coming from North Carolina, a kid that's 6'6", 373. But here's what kind of caught my eye about Miles McVay. Yes, he's got some work to do, but he at one point was at Alabama and transferred from Alabama to North Carolina. If you're telling me at some point this kid was recruited to Alabama to play there as an offensive lineman from an SEC school, I'm going to kind of take the notion that this kid's got some athleticism and some talent, even if it didn't necessarily work out at Bama. And something that's been said a lot through people I listen to when it comes to recruiting and such is that sometimes it's not necessarily about your star rating or, how many offers you have. It's who is recruiting you and who is offering you. And if Miles McVay was the guy that was offered and it was accepted at Bama, then I think that's a guy you got to give a call to and you got to roll the dice on. Again, it could end up not working out to be the best. But, I mean, there's not too many athletic guards out there that you're going to find that are 6'6", 373. So I think that's a guy you should definitely roll the dice on. But offensive line, again, is a position that you are going to have to address for LSU. Obviously, we know that. Again, the only problem really is that it's hard to do that in the portal because there's just not that many guys, top-end guys at least, readily available as compared to other positions like quarterback and receiver. It's easier to build up your rooms in those areas because there's more talented players entering. It's harder with offensive linemen. But I think the one nugget with that before I move on to our next position group is this. Kiffin's obviously been doing this for a long time, working with the portal and doing it at a very high level. You just got to trust that maybe even, yes, if he's going after some smaller school offensive linemen, that he and their GM for LSU have done their homework and have given an evaluation to a certain kid because they go, oh, that could work, and that's a guy we should bring in. Fans are always going to want certain things. Again, for me, obviously, I'm a little SEC bias. I think the SEC just plays at a different level, so when there's Oklahoma guys in the portal at the offensive line or a Texas guy on the offensive line, I kind of want to pick those guys up because they've been playing in the SEC, even maybe not even as starters, but just as backups or something like that. And I know the value that can bring. But other guys may value different things, different, styles of play. Are they more athletic? Can they keep up in an up-tempo offense? Can they block a certain way that Eric Wolford wants them to block? I don't know. But we got to trust Kiffin and his staff on how they evaluate the portal. And so anyways, we're going to obviously probably get guys that I don't even have listed. But we'll move on now from offensive line to running back, because this is the next big important position for me that you need to address. And yes, getting Harlem Berry back for sure in the mix is a huge step forward. But the problem is the room behind Berry is a little uncertain. You don't know if Caden Durham is coming back. That is not something that's been for sure or not up to this point, whether Durham's going to go to the portal or stay or whatever. So you don't know that. You also don't know anything about Kewan Lacey yet. Is Kewan Lacey going to come back into the fold? Is he going to stay at Ole Miss? I don't know. But what I do know is this. Harlem Berry is there, and that's a very important building block already. But I also know that Harlem Berry is pretty much the last guy for sure in the room, unless Caden Durham decides to come back, because JT Lindsey, who is still technically on the roster, is still dealing with his legal troubles, which means there's still a possibility he's not on this team next year. So here are some guys at the running back position that I think LSU should chase after for sure. The first one being Caleb Hawkins. Caleb Hawkins is a top 10 player for On3's transfer portal site. He is coming from North Texas, which obviously just had a very explosive offensive season. He's 6'2", 200 pounds. And while he's not necessarily a guy that like screams super explosive plays, he is a very reliable back. He does not cough up the ball a whole lot. He's good at pass pro, which is obviously a huge part of Kiffin's offense. And I think that would give him a lot of value. And look, just because he doesn't have that high end, maybe breakaway potential, guess who does? Harlem Berry. And that's kind of the whole point with this list for running back for me is like, yeah, maybe Hawkins doesn't have that super explosiveness to him, but Berry does. And that's why having Berry back is such a huge building block, because now you're kind of more so looking for a partner that would complement him or just be a 1-2 punch with him, whether they bring the same skill set or different skill sets or whatever. But Caleb Hawkins is a guy that I think you got to give a call to, because obviously he's going to be a guy that can be really, really good. Only problem is with a lot of these North Texas guys, I'm wondering if they're going to follow their coach, Eric Morris, to Oklahoma State. But we'll just have to figure that out. Next up is Trey Wisner. Trey Wisner is a running back coming from the University of Texas. He is a very physical downhill runner. He can wear down defenses. He's really good between the tackles. And that's something obviously LSU has been missing the last couple years from their running back room. I like Wisner a lot. I think this is a guy that would complement Berry very well. Because while, yes, he's not necessarily a guy that's going to go out, maybe catch passes really well or anything like that. Again, Berry is a better pass catching back and can make those explosive plays out in the space. So you just need a guy like Wisner who can come and wear down the defenses with his more aggressive and powerful downhill running style. So I think Wisner is a guy you definitely need to call because, again, he played in the SEC. He did well at the SEC level. And I think he's a guy definitely worth rolling the dice on. As well as another Texas running back that's in the portal, CJ Baxter. I know CJ Baxter has had a lot of injuries the last couple years, which has kind of, made people a little bit wary of him. But look, Baxter really does have that high-end potential to be like a multifaceted threat running back. He can run really well. He can pass catch very well. He's got all of the tools in the bag to be a very successful running back. And I think something that could be appealing for CJ Baxter is knowing, hey, if I come to LSU, Kiffin's offense can obviously elevate all the things that I do well, but I've also got a really awesome running back partner in Harlem Berry next to me where we can work off of each other and I'm not having to carry the entire load of the offense. And I think that's a guy that's definitely worth looking into if you're Lane Kiffin. Because again, can you kind of build this story for CJ Baxter where he comes to LSU, a school that's really struggled to run the ball recently the last few years, and tell him, hey, you've now got an opportunity to really turn your career around and also make some LSU fans really happy by being a star running back here. I think they got to roll the dice on CJ Baxter. Again, I know injuries are a concern, but that's a guy with a lot of potential. As is the last guy that I want to talk about when it comes to running backs, which is Dylan Edwards. Dylan Edwards obviously spent some time at Colorado, then went to Kansas State. Also a guy with some injury issues and some size concerns, being 5'8", 155. But this guy is lightning in a bottle. He is fast. He can make some big-time plays happen. You talk about a guy that can just absolutely create in the open space. Dylan Edwards can do a lot of really good things. The problem is, again, he is on the smaller side, so maybe pass pro-wise, he's not going to do very good. Do you really want to pair him up with a Berry, where Berry's not necessarily this big physical runner as much as he is more of an explosive style runner? I don't know if that complements each other very well. And again, Kiffin may not care about that. He may just care about getting as many names into the building as possible for the running back position. But for me, if I was building this roster, I would want a little bit more complementary style running backs. And so I would think for myself, while Edwards would definitely be a nice option, I would definitely kick the tires on him. Unless I can land a Baxter or a Wisner as well, maybe that's a guy I pump the brakes on just a little bit if he's the only other guy I can get, because he's not going to be like the every down back, So, all that being said, though, running back is a position of concern for me because I do think this is a guy that you've just got to make sure that you shore up this. Well, not just a guy. You got to have multiple guys in this running back room to help out with Harlan Berry in case Durham leaves, Kewan Lacey doesn't come in, and then JT Lindsay also eventually gets kicked off the team or something. So running back is a big position that I think they also need to address in the portal. Next up, we're talking about the defensive line. And obviously, this is broken up by defensive tackles and defensive ends and edge rushers. But for defensive tackles, there are some very appealing names in the portal. First up being Amaris Williams. Now, this is a guy that is coming from Auburn. And look, say what you will about Auburn's offense. Their defense was awesome. And if you're telling me you've got an opportunity to land anybody that was a player on that Auburn defensive line, I want some of that. And Amaris Williams is a guy that I definitely think the LSU defense should go after. He provides definitely a position of need. You need better interior defensive lineman play. Dominic McKinley is a former 5-star, so obviously he is a nice piece to the puzzle. But you saw that without Bernard Gooden this year, they really struggled sometimes. So they've got to land some elite defensive tackles because you can't just rely upon the incoming, true freshman to lead you. Now, this is a recent name, so I don't know much about him, but Eric Daughtery is a pretty highly rated defensive tackle on 3, the 39th overall player. 6'2", 295 coming from Boston College. Maybe he's a guy to roll the dice on just from a size perspective. Like, it's a big guy. I don't know much about him, but I would think that's a guy I would want to go after. Ian Geffrard is a guy coming from Arkansas. 6'6", 370. You talk about a guy that can really move the pile, can really be a disruptive inside guy. This is the type of guy I think you need to go after. Again, you need guys that can be disruptive, that can get into the backfield, that can stuff the run, that can be big time, difference makers on the line, because you just didn't really have that last year outside of when Gooden was playing, and that was about it. And I think you got to pair up, Dominic McKinley or whoever with guys that can be those disruptive playmakers. Another guy that's got SEC ties is Makai Boyro, 6'5", 350 coming from Florida. Another dude that is coming from a defense where I say, listen, this is a guy, if you told me he's coming from Florida's defensive line, I want him. I want him. Because Florida's defensive line was also awesome this past year. So this is a guy that's very athletic. He's obviously really big. He can be a good space eater. He'll need some time to adjust to the defensive system. But I think obviously getting a guy like this with that kind of upside would be tremendous for your defensive line. So those are some guys that I think you should go after. And again, I can't stress this enough. The list is getting updated over and over and over and over again. So these are guys that I think definitely, it could be different every single day. Who's entering, who's coming in. Maybe some big fish land. As I'm recording this right now, shortly before the new year begins, Ohio State just lost to Miami. So do Ohio State defensive linemen enter the portal? Do any Ohio State defenders enter the portal? I don't know. Any offensive linemen from Ohio State enter the portal? We don't know yet. But that's a school, and as schools start to get eliminated from the playoffs, you need to watch their rosters and see what happens. But those are my interior defensive guys. As for defensive ends, Chaz Coleman is the biggest fish in the pond. He's the number 2 ranked overall player in the portal from Penn State. That's a guy you got to go after. John Henry Daly is a newer addition from Utah. He is the 4th ranked player in the transfer portal according to On3. That's a guy you obviously got to go after. Jaden Woods from Florida, I think, is a little bit raw in terms of his technique and overall polish. But again, you tell me an edge from Florida who's ranked 11th right now in the portal, I got to go get him. Wendell Gregory is a guy from Oklahoma State that I think is interesting. He's also very highly ranked in the portal right now. Now, I think he's got a little bit of weight to put on. He's 6'3", 220. But that's a guy that I think can provide some good run support, maybe not as much pass rush, which I think is something that LSU needs a little bit more of. But you look at what like Jack Pyburn was able to do, where he really set a lot of the tone when it comes to setting the rushing edge for run defense. I think Wendell Gregory would be a great guy to kind of replace Pyburn with. And yeah, really, outside of those guys, I'm not really seeing much else on this list so far. But again, more names could come. I mean, John Henry Daly is a very, very recent addition. So we'll just have to see how that goes. But those are my defensive line guys. And I think defensive line is another unit you're going to have to hit kind of hard, because those are guys that you're going to need to kind of step up and be big time playmakers for you, because you're losing Pyburn, you're losing Jamari Butler, you're losing Patrick Payton. Gabe Relaford is going to be back, but he's coming off of a big time shoulder surgery. So again, you're having to replace a lot of guys on that line already. Ahmad Bro, a defensive tackle, is leaving. So you're going to have to restock the cupboard, so to speak. And you got to make sure the guys you're getting are very impactful. But I'm sure Kiffin and company will be shooting for the big guns in the barrel. Now we get to my last big time position in need for LSU in the portal, and that's wide receiver. And look, obviously, when it comes to wide receiver, the great thing is that you have just a ton of options. But the problem is do you really need to go out and get all of those guys? I don't know. Now, obviously, the biggest fish in the barrel is Cam Coleman. And listen, I'm not going to be dumb and say that you don't go after Cam Coleman. Cam Coleman has been a phenomenal receiver for Auburn the last 2 years. If you can land him, absolutely go get him. But the thing is everybody's going to be after him. And do you really want to be in a bidding war for $2+ million for one receiver when maybe for that same amount, you can go get maybe 2 other receivers and just kind of put those 2 guys in your room with the guys you already have, like Kyle Parker? That's the puzzle piece you're going to have to think about. But of course, obviously, you'd be dumb not to chase after Cam Coleman. So he's the top of the list for sure. But I think we should kind of put him off separately because, that's the golden prize, the big jewel. But here are the guys that I think are maybe a little bit more realistic that you should go chase after. Omarion Miller is the first guy I want to bring up. Coming from Colorado, he's actually from Louisiana. Guy 6'1", 192. I think he's a guy that's very, very good in terms of consistency. He's very reliable at catching. He'll provide a good route runner. He may not be the most explosive guy in the portal, but sometimes you don't need a guy like that. You just need a guy that can go out and make catches for you. And you're losing Aaron Anderson, who's a very reliable target for you with steady hands. I think replacing him with a guy like Omarion Miller could be very, very good. Now, another guy that I would love for LSU to land is Eugene Wilson III from Florida. Kind of the opposite of Omarion Miller. While he's not necessarily a big, receiver that's going to go out there and just be physical and be your kind of steady hands guy, This dude is fast as all get out. You get the ball into his hands, he can take off. And I'm telling you, put a guy like that in Lane Kiffin's offense, even if he is a little bit smaller as a slot receiver, this guy could do wonders. He's got some durability concerns with injuries, but again, at LSU, you're not just relying upon him all the time. And I think he would be an awesome, awesome addition to the LSU receiving room. I think another guy to potentially look at is DeAndre Moore, coming from Texas. DeAndre Moore, in terms of he's a more physical type receiver. He's a guy that could really be good for you over the middle of the field. He's also a pretty good run blocker, but he's not necessarily super athletic. He's not really necessarily good at like just blowing past people, getting separation. But again, your kind of checks when it comes to this receiver room, for me at least, you don't just want all of one type of player. I want a variety of receivers. Like Kyle Parker is fast enough to be your speedster receiver. You add him with Eugene Wilson and Omarion Miller. And yeah, maybe Omarion Miller is slower and is just more so your steady hands guys, but you've got your athletic outside playmakers with Wilson and Kyle Parker. You know what I'm saying? So it's more like putting the puzzle pieces together, making one big picture that's really nice, rather than just having three really good individual pieces. And so for me, that's some guys I would look at. Now, a lot of people are in on Nick Marsh from Michigan State. He's 6'3", 200. I don't know too much about him. He is the 18th ranked player in the portal right now. So, like, that could be a really nice get for LSU potentially. But, again, I kind of like the guys that I have listed just because these are guys that I think could fit in really well here. Now, the last kind of category I want to talk about is some bonus guys, because obviously there are some positions for LSU where you're not necessarily like struggling for guys, but you could always add some guys into the room. And so, like for corner, for instance, you don't really need to go out and find another Mansour Delane. You've got Pickett, you got Woodland, but you could always add some depth. Jontez Williams from Iowa State is a pretty highly rated corner in the portal, but like Jay Crawford is a guy coming out of Auburn, sophomore, has played a little bit, 27th ranked player in the portal. You go get a guy like that just to add a little bit of some depth to that room. I think that's a great idea. I really do. You look at the safety spot again, you're going to have, TaMarcus Cooley and Deshaun Spears. So you don't necessarily need to go get the biggest fish in the pond. But like just looking at the list, the guy that stuck out to me the most was a guy like Derek Williams coming out of Texas, a Louisiana guy from New Iberia. That obviously could add into the rotation. But even a guy like Jordan Castile, who is coming from Florida, a veteran safety that maybe isn't going to be your everyday starter, but just a veteran that you can add to the room to add some stability. I think that would be really nice for them to do that. And I think that would shore up the secondary, again, not necessarily with high-end starters like you had to go get last year, but just shoring up the room with some depth and some experience to give guys a breather every now and again when they need that. And as we wrap up portal talk, I'll say this. I do think LSU is going to have to go after a linebacker as well, just because, Whit Weeks should be back from all that I've heard. And the nice thing is you've got some younger guys like Devon Keys, Tylen Singleton that will be back, hopefully, that showed some promise. But I think having another linebacker with some experience would be very good. The problem is there's just not a whole lot of guys in the portal right now that would scream like guys that you should go after. Rasheem Biles from Pitt is a very highly rated guy, a top 10 player in the portal. That's a guy that, maybe you kick the tires on. Robert Woodyard coming from Auburn, another pretty highly rated guy, a top, 50-ish player in the portal. He could be a guy too that you go after. But all in all, there's just not enough like high end linebackers in the portal right now where I would say there are guys that you must grab. But I do think LSU will maybe try to add one veteran linebacker. It's just not a huge need because you got a lot of youth in that department right now. But those are some guys that I think they could kick the tires on potentially. Now, the portal talk is obviously going to be a lot, but that's going to wrap up my list. So what we'll do is we'll take just a really quick break, and I'm just going to give some final quick thoughts on LSU's 2025 season. Tiger fans, if you're looking for some of the best sporting apparel on the market, then look no further than our friends over at Melreg. Melreg makes some of the best products out there, from golf shirts to golf pants to quarter zips to hoodies. They've got it all. They're soft, they're comfortable, and the best part is you're not paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars for this stuff. A lot of it's like 40 to 50 bucks. Super affordable, super high quality, and hey, here's some other good news. If you use our code BAYOUROAR at checkout, that's BAYOU ROAR, when you check out, you're going to save 15% off your order. So head on over to Melreg, that's MAELREG.com, or use the link in the show notes below and go ahead and grab your new favorite piece of sporting gear today. All right, so we all know that the 2025 LSU football season was a little underwhelming to say the least. But there were still some nice things that I think we saw from this year, especially in the bowl game, that could be some good news for the Lane Kiffin era coming up. Because now, as we're turning the page to 2026 officially on the calendar, you know, we do have some hope. Michael Van Buren just had an excellent game against Houston. That's a great sign that at least, even if Van Buren's not your starter next year, that if he stays, he's got some potential to potentially mold himself into a really viable quarterback for you. You had a lot of young players also step up in the bowl game. Deshaun Spears, Devon Keys, Tylen Singleton. You had a lot of guys that, yes, got picked on like DJ Pickett, but that's just going to mold them and shape them to be better. I know the end result was not great, but look, Blake Baker knows that defense, you know, has got to take a step forward in terms of bridging the gap between the starters and the backups. He knows that the starters for them are going to be elite and they're going to be awesome. But he knew that the backups were maybe still a little bit behind the bar. And they didn't play awful against Houston. It's just, it's hard to take out 6 of your 11 starting defenders and have the same type of game that you're accustomed to having. And so hopefully with an offseason to work and get some of these younger guys farther along, you start to see that gap shorten a little bit. But I think the biggest good news is obviously that a coaching change is coming. I think if there was anything that screamed a positive for LSU coming off of that loss against Houston, is that Lane Kiffin is coming in. Frank Wilson is a very nice guy, and I am sad that he is leaving the staff. He's a guy that I have always kind of liked as a recruiter, as just a guy on the team. But Frank, obviously this proved why he was not up for the starting job. Whether that was having all 3 of your timeouts going into halftime, which, look, you can't take them with you. You can't save them for the second half. Just use them. Or whether it was punting the ball on a possession where you should have just gone for it on 4th down. 4th quarter, you have a 4th and 2, a 4th and 3. Yes, you're at your own like 43 or 44. But at that point, what do you have left to lose? There's 7 minutes left in the ball game. It's a tight game. Your defense has been struggling. Just go for it. The worst you can do is give them a short field and they score quickly, and you go back out there. That was kind of dumbfounding. And then, of course, Harlem Berry starts the game off with this awesome run, is your best running back. And then like all of a sudden, he's just falling. He fumbles the ball because somebody peanut punched it away from him. And then you hold him back the rest of the game. I mean, it's just coaching decisions like that were just very dumbfounding, and things that just, are inexcusable. Like, yeah, fumbling the ball is not great, but it wasn't Harlem Berry's fault that he fumbled. Somebody literally punched the ball out. It's very hard to stop a very excellently timed peanut punch. It really is. That's one of the hardest things to stop. And it's just, I mean, that's something you cannot forgive Frank Wilson for making such bad decisions like that. So, all in all, yes, Frank Wilson's a very nice guy. I'm going to miss him. But you got a new staff coming in with new life, new culture. The Brian Kelly era is now officially closed up and boarded up. We'll never have to see it again. And brighter days are seemingly on the horizon, which is awesome to see. And so we have some things to look forward to as well. We got women's basketball to look forward to. Maybe the men's basketball team will surprise us. And of course, baseball season's right around the corner. So, hey, make sure you're liked, subscribed, wherever you get your podcast from. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe there. We'd love to keep up with you all. We're going to try our best to keep up with women's basketball, men's basketball, baseball, all those good things. But obviously, football has just kind of dominated the scene the last, couple weeks, couple months, all that stuff. So, as we move forward, a lot of exciting things, obviously, to talk about. Of course, we still got football stuff because the portal opens up soon. And we'll have all the names to talk about and how they'll fit once they officially start being announced. However, I hope you all have an awesome start to your new year. I really do. I hope 2026 is an awesome year for all of you. And I hope that you are safe, had a lot of fun, and are enjoying some playoff football right now as we start to figure out who's going to be the national champion this year. But anyways, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And hey, let's go Tigers.